Okay, we are now online, and we are starting our. Sorry, we're starting our discussion of within one of the two panels, which we're holding today, within a joint Horizon project for a more joined up foreign policy of European Union that a consortium of think tanks and universities has been implementing over the last 3 years. And today's discussion is about the it have this general umbrella title of EU and Ukraine in Multipolar and Turbulent World and Challenges for Global Security. So we are opening with first panel, which will be about the war in Ukraine and the EU geopolitical awakening. We will also talk a bit about practical steps. And then the second panel will follow, where we will talk more about reaching out for common security beyond Europe and North America. So this discussion today is hosted by School of Policy Analysis, which is part of the National University of Kiev Mohyla Academy. We're very happy to be the part of the joint consortium. And we are based in Kiev, so I will say, and some of our participants also based in Kiev, so I will immediately say that we have an eye siren now for the missiles in Kiev, and there might be some interruptions if it is discovered that it's something serious. We might need to go to shelter. So I apologize or warn everyone in the end, because our first priority is for everyone to stay safe. And we are very happy to have with us today our speakers and also colleagues also for this consortium is Steven Blockmans, a Senior Research Fellow, Center for European Policy Studies and International Center for Defense and Security. Then we have with us Christy Reich, and she's Deputy Director, Head of a Foreign Policy Program, International Center for Defense and Security. And we're also very happy to have with us today Yaroslav Timofeyuk, who is the head of political section of the EU delegation to Ukraine. And we are very grateful that you were able to join us today. There should be one more participant for this panel, and I hope that she will join as soon as she can. We also have with us today I'm not very good at reading names. Timilin Okamo, I apologize if I read it incorrectly, who is Coordinator, Research and Policy Analyst Unit from Africa, Office of Security and Program, Institute for Peace and Security Studies. We invited Timmy to be a very active participant in the second panel, but you're also welcome to add your thoughts to our first panel too. Thank you very much for joining us. Especially being a bit in when we have air sirens in Kiev, you can't really stop thinking that there is a war going on, and it's very real, and it's very you can touch it almost with your hands, and you every time in this space you have this feeling, and I know that we plan for the first section to discuss that a bit of a political discussion, but especially as we see this in many ways, the war becoming more and more probably looming, or this real thing that is I guess everyone understands that it won't end in next few months there. So it's become a very real thing that needs a lot of effort. So with this in the context, for this year, which is a year of European elections and political and electoral turbulence in the US, do you think that there is a window of opportunity for the EU to strengthen its geopolitical position and influence? So we'll start a bit from this, and please, who wants to start?
I can do it if you wish. Yes, okay. So thank you for this introduction, Anna. Indeed, it is kind of symbolic that you have the air alert on in Kiev at the very moment as we speak. I visited Kiev myself about a month ago, and it happened that I ended up giving a conference presentation actually in shelter. So we get these very concrete reminders about how serious the situation is. And then we look at what is going on in the decision-making circles in European capitals. And I'm constantly frustrated about the slow pace of Europeans actually taking decisions to step up assistance to Ukraine. The EU and European countries have, of course, done very much during the past 2+ years, and in many ways also unexpected measures to offer military support to Ukraine, and all the other ways that the EU has been trying to counter the Russian war of aggression by increasing the cost of aggression, by imposing sanctions on Russia, which are really unprecedented in their scope and depth. But yet we look at what is going on the front in Ukraine, and this is not enough. It's clear it's not enough, and Ukraine is paying with lives of Ukrainian citizens every day for Europe not being able to do more. So now I think we are at the point where it's really like a moment of truth for Europe as a geopolitical actor, and also for European strategic autonomy, which has been a concept we have used over many years, also before the full-scale war in Ukraine. But I think now it is getting kind of new urgency and also new relevance, because we are still waiting for the decisions from the US on new military aid package to Ukraine. We still don't know if it is coming or not. And it's very clear that Europe cannot be certain about the continued commitment of the United States to European security. It's kind of sinking in different European capitals that this actually means Europe needs to do much more for its own defense, and it needs to build up its defense industry. But of course, the most urgent question is to do more to provide assistance to Ukraine. And at this very moment, the commitments of European countries and the EU collectively have increased, and they have surpassed the level of assistance provided by the US, which was not the case like during the 2 first years of the war. I was just kind of checking the figures before this discussion. So during the first 2 years, 2022-23, looking at just military assistance, the US provided 41 billion euros, and the EU and member states together 28 billion of military assistance. So clearly the US was doing more, but by now the balance has kind of turned, but still we are talking to some extent about commitments that Europeans have made, but that will take time to materialize. And we see how difficult it has been for the EU to actually provide, for example, the 1 million shells that it has promised to deliver. And we just don't seem to have that amount of shells available in Europe that European countries could immediately give. So we are looking for all sorts of possible channels and getting the material from different third countries. The same for air defense, which is the most critical issue at this very moment. And again, even if Europe would want to do more, it is not really capable of providing. Well, to some extent, it's also a question of how much European countries are ready to give away of their equipment, meaning that this will then weaken their own defense capability. What is the critical level? I think that's also the discussion we are having in Europe. Provided that Ukraine is in such an urgent critical situation, perhaps there is more that European countries could give at the moment, and then working on kind of replenishing their own stocks as soon as possible. But that also involves then certain risks. So it's very much focused on this question of immediate military aid, but at the same time, we have to look at a bit longer term or mid-term future. And it's clear that this need for stronger European defense capability and defense industry, it's not going away. It's very clearly stated in the strategy documents of the EU and also NATO that Russia is a long-term serious threat to European security, which really means that there is a lot of work to be done in Europe in order to be able to manage this threat. And I think looking like, let's say, beyond this year, there is reason for some hope, because I think Europe actually does have the resources to manage, and it's moving in the right direction. We are hearing like weekly on new decisions in different European countries about stepping up defense industrial production and increasing the defense spending in different countries. Because some of the European countries are still below even the 2% of GDP of defense spending, which is the NATO requirement. There are other countries that are well above, but that still see the need to increase further, because the security environment is going to be difficult for many years to come. And as you said, Anna, in your introduction, no one is expecting the war to be over in the next few months. So this is a long battle. It's not possible to predict at this moment how exactly or when it is going to end. We need to be aware that it really depends a lot on the European ability to kind of get its act together, how the situation will develop in Ukraine. And the slower Europeans are in providing assistance to Ukraine, the bigger the risk that the long-term costs will grow even bigger. I mean, the more we lose time and the weaker the position of Ukraine becomes, and the risk of Ukraine eventually losing, the bigger the dangers become for the EU member states, especially the ones bordering Russia. So in any case, we will need to invest much more in our defense, and we need to be confident that we are able to do it as Europeans. We are able to take care of our security and defense, but it's of course a big challenge and a lot still to be done, and also in some countries more difficult than in others to also convince the citizens that this is indeed what is necessary. We have an election year, and the priorities in various European countries are different. Because sitting in Tallinn, nobody needs to convince people in Estonia that this war is hugely important for Europe and we need to invest in supporting Ukraine. But then, kind of understandably, in countries that are not so close, it is different matters, and people have different priorities. So it takes political leadership to persuade people, and it's not necessarily going to be easier after the European Parliament elections. Maybe somebody else wants to pick up and say a bit more about the prospects there. I will stop for a moment.
Yeah, thank you, Kristi. And I probably think that Yaroslav, you have reactions, please.
Yeah, with pleasure. Actually, I feel a bit redundant because I think Kristi has done a good job for me. I would agree with most of her what she said. Actually, nice to see you, Kristi. We used to work in the same institution many years ago, and also I read carefully the paper that was distributed before this meeting, EU Policy Towards Ukraine, Entering Geopolitical Competition of a European Order. So I must say, from my perspective, I mean, I arrived to Kiev in September last year. Before I was at the EU delegation to the OSCE, where of course the major topic in the recent years had been Ukraine, the Russian war against Ukraine. And I must say, from the EU perspective, I was personally in 2022. I was positively surprised that the EU did what it did. I mean, it was higher than my initial expectations, but of course, then also there were different expectations about the possibility of Ukraine to defend itself against the Russians. There were maybe too many expectations as to the Russian capabilities, but now I would say, as Kristi also said, now we don't know how long this war will go on. It is clearly a war of attrition. Also on the Ukrainian side, I think the expectation was for a breakthrough last year. They didn't materialize. We are getting ready to a longer war, most likely. And of course, the EU member states have to get their acts together. And I think we are getting our acts together. Of course, everybody wishes, me personally also, that it should happen quicker than it is happening, but still, as somebody said, the EU is like a big ship, big vessel, moving rather slowly. But when it takes a direction, it goes in this direction. So, in the end, I think it is obvious now for everyone that European defense is back at the center of the public debate in Europe. Every meeting in Brussels, European Council, FAC, other meetings, the Russian war against Ukraine, the Russian aggression is at the center of attention, and the question is what we can do, how we can help. And of course, Kristi also mentioned that that there was this promise of delivery, for example, of 1 million shells. We didn't deliver 1 million shells until now. We delivered only 500,000 shells. The idea is to deliver the rest by the end of this year. Why? It was a promise, maybe it was a commitment, and people were not realizing the issue of production capacities. Simply, EU member states were not ready to gather those ammunition shells. Now, a lot of member states they do the acts together. They develop a defense industry. You've seen also in Brussels in March, Commissioner Breton announced a European defense industry the strategy and plan. There will be now a tangible event on the 6th of May in Brussels. There will be an EU-Ukraine Defense Industry Forum. Not only a political event, but also the idea of matchmaking between European industries and Ukrainian industries. For example, we're also meeting, me and my colleagues were meeting defense industries yesterday here in Kiev to talk about this event. People are really very much interested how to move the things together. And I must say, when High Representative Borrell was here in February, he also visited a drone production site in Kiev, and it was really very much impressive how a private company is helping war efforts, how they work like 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, producing a lot for the front line. What else about European elections? And one thing about maybe the US elections. I think independently of what happens in the US, who wins the election, it is clear that defense spending, development of defense capabilities in Europe will remain a priority for the upcoming years. On the European elections, me personally, I don't think that there would be any big change in relation to our general approach to Ukraine. I would expect maybe in some countries, there would be some maybe domestic repercussions from the European elections, but in general, I would not think that this would change anything. And of course, we are looking forward to the new European Commission, who will be the president of the European Commission, who will be the new High Representative. Also, the president of the European Council will change, but those are, let's say, normal developments, expected developments. So I think I will stop here, but of course we'll be ready to answer any questions, comments, and contribute to the debate. But also I'm very much interested in listening to other colleagues on the panel and to students. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noting down some questions, but at the moment, I would like to ask Stephen to add your thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, maybe a few facts to elaborate on the points which have already been raised. I was happy to see that GOP leader Mike Johnson is ready to make a U-turn now and finally support the idea of lethal aid to Ukraine. Of course, that's not a guarantee that if Donald Trump wins the US presidential elections, that assistance will be forthcoming in 2025 and next year's. So I think the assumption which is implicit in your question, Anna, is correct. Not so much on the European parliamentary election side. I don't think it matters a great deal. The power shifts won't be that dramatic to change, the European Parliament's relatively limited role in, forging an EU foreign and security policy anyway. Might be a bit more on the economic security side, but it's especially, of course, the outcome of the US elections. There, I don't think it matters a great deal who will win. I think there will be turmoil regardless of who wins. Elections will be contested. The US will be more inward looking, and the potential of its international absence may be felt throughout Europe, and of course it will be more acute if Trump wins. So to look at it from a transatlantic perspective, perhaps I think the window of opportunity that you sketched out in your question is in fact closing, and that puts pressure on the US, on Germany to deliver, missiles, Patriots, Taurus, etc. It puts pressure on the EU to deliver its, what is it now, the commitment 1.2 ammunition shells, I believe, by autumn. But also do not forget that there's a couple of important summits that will take place over the summer. We already had the Vilnius summit, of course, but there will be a Washington NATO summit at the beginning of July. We had, of course, the 75th anniversary with, the largest ever live exercises, as a show of strength by the alliance. I'm not sure if this was really, picked up, but there's of course a need, to seize the moment of the NATO summit in Washington, to send a strong message. That strong message might be that Ukraine's, post-war accession to NATO, as Macron has suggested, will take place. But I think it will be parked on the side simply because there are too many divisions between allies, and those will not want to be displayed at the NATO summit in July. But there's also the G7 summit, the 50th of its kind, and to be held in Italy. I think in other domains that this is relevant because there will be pressure to finally agree on the confiscation of Russian central bank assets. There have been some moves, the US and the European level, to set aside those windfall profits, but what to do with them? The US, under the Biden administration, with its Treasury Department and OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, is pushing Europeans real hard to go further than that. There will also be a push, I think, again, for the creation of a tribunal for the crime of aggression. So in that domain, there might be some movement. Transatlantically on trade and tech, we've seen the dialogue convene several times, but not paper over the transatlantic rifts which have erupted. I think in another field, maritime security, which of course is also important for Ukraine, with its exit to the Black Sea for its agri-food products. I think the relative success of a fast launch in the Red Sea operations to protect merchant shipping and defend the freedom of navigation in a way, with the US, presence with from the Persian Gulf with the EU new CSDP operation Aspides and several other flanking operations. I think this is an important signal to the rest of the world that the West collectively, at least, is willing to put skin in the game for that. It's a signal to China, incidentally, to keep the Taiwan Strait open. So I think transatlantically, there's a lot to be played for in the next couple of months. And that political urgency, as was already mentioned by Christy in particular, I think is very present. But whether it will translate into action is quite another. On the European front, you asked for geopolitical Europe. Maybe to add to what was already said on defense, I fully agree. On foreign affairs, it's absolutely key that the enlargement file will be pushed in a concrete fashion. We're not just talking about, Ukraine's defense of the EU's future external borders. After all, that's very much geopolitics. We're also thinking about, the ways to give concrete hands and feet to that geopolitical necessity by gradually integrating candidate countries such as Ukraine prior to the moment of future full membership. And here in the area of defense, the European Defense Industrial Strategy and its program offer opportunities to link up with Ukraine. We might talk about that later. But also in the areas of the single market, we just had the presentation by Enrico Letta yesterday evening for the European Council of his single market report, where he clearly states that European geoeconomic autonomy will not be defended in the future if the member states do not agree to integrate the energy, the digital and the telecommunications markets further into the European Union, and indeed link in the candidate countries in that respect. Mobilizing extra private funding for that purpose too. I think those elements are very much connected, I think, and so the push for the European Union to think more holistically, talking about total war concepts, more holistically about using all of its instruments to defend and promote its foreign and security policy interests, which of course start with the promotion and the protection of the rules-based international order, I think will be absolutely key going forward in the next policy and institutional cycle for the European Union, and then to match in the upcoming multi-annual financial framework talks. The 7-year budget of the European Union, those ambitions with concrete financial envelopes. The budget for the European Union to make that triple transition in defense, digital, and greening the economy will cost European taxpayers, will probably lead to a bigger budget, and therefore to painful discussion between member states to raise their national contributions in terms of percentage to their national GDP. Again, the push is there, the mental reflections are there. Whether the political constellation will come together remains to be seen, but I think those external forces have in the past forced member states to take actions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And I would ask Timmy to probably reflect and add your perspective, which I guess would be very, very important to us, because in a way, I guess everyone from you, and probably even in many cases, a lot of Ukrainians would see it from the same angle, probably. But I'm sure that Timmy, you might add additional levels, angles, and reflections to that, please. If you have any reflections.
You're referring to me, right?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. So am I to respond to this, or like because my internet went off when we're starting, so I'm not sure whether this is my panel yet, or
Yeah, it is not your panel, but if you have any reflections,
okay,
then
okay.
I would be very much
Okay.
welcome.
From my end, I don't have anything. I think they pretty much covered most of the points I would have maybe hinted at. And even with deeper knowledge, actually. So I have nothing to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you anyway. And yeah, thank you for joining for this panel when yours is next one. But I want to react to several points and in a bit of a retrospection. I very much agree with Yaroslav when you mentioned that you were surprised by the force and amount of what you done and consolidated. I guess it was the probably the feeling shared by majority of Ukrainians that we in a way we very much wished for, but we didn't really expect the amount of support and help, although that was very much what we wished for. And here I also think that you and others emphasize an important point, which quite often got lost and forgotten, that there is a limit to capabilities to help, which is what you have in your storage, or what you have in your what are the capabilities of production. So you can't really give like hundreds of tanks if you don't have several hundreds of tanks. So it's only that much that can be produced. And I guess in many cases we are forgotten that for many years, for example, the European Union hadn't been preparing for the big war, and Ukraine, at least until 2014, hadn't been preparing for the war. The actual course of the movement has been very different. So it does look that there needed to be a turnaround, and for different parties it happens at a different moment. But then it's very slowly we're getting on this course where I guess everyone understands that we're here for a long haul in a many ways. And I really think that this concept that you mentioned, Stephen, of the total war, it's probably very fitting, because it's a war on many different levels. And what's more, I guess, I'm not sure the original concept includes it, but I guess it's very important that the war won't stop on the when the action will stop on the battlefield. The war itself won't necessarily stop, because we have to prepare for the period of another type of competition, I would say, or conflict with Russia, or whatever configuration there will be. But I really don't think Russia is going away anytime soon, even if it loses the war on the battlefield. So there is really a question of totality, and of picking up a lot of issues in different fronts, which is not necessarily only military, but also digital, cyber front, and political and diplomatic. And when you mention Christy, and you first mentioned these trials and tribunals, and then Stephen mentioned them too. I guess this is also a very important dimension. I would say this battle for rule-based order that won't stop even after the warfare will stop. So probably the question, I'm very happy on a way to hear that in your assumption the situation, at least on the EU side, won't change much after the EU election. It certainly gives some hope, especially, and I totally agree with the assumption that in any way, whomever will gain, will win or lose the US election, there will be turbulence in any way, continuation of this political struggle there. But and here probably add some points from the second question. We've seen the heightening of rhetoric, especially of the type of, I put it in a question, that President Macron's type of reference, where he really, I guess, give voice to particular messages of sending troops, or of taking a more active part in an actual warfare. And I would want to add another layer. What do you think is the political discourse around that, but also what did the public or popular support for these ideas? Because indeed, while the thing, my perception from here in Ukraine, that while this rhetoric might be more logical for countries that are bordering Russia, countries that are not so close are probably are more alarmed or are more by economic issues, or what might happen if there will be like an active troop involvement, or let's say using Patriots to take down some other Patriots to take down rockets or missiles heading for Ukraine, what implications it might have. So what would you say the perception of this kind of rhetoric? If who wants to start? Jaroslav, probably. Oh, Christy.
Well, I can start, but very cautiously, because as an EU official, I shouldn't comment too freely about EU member states, especially France and the French president. No, but I must say that for me, it is also one element of this geopolitical awakening of Europe. I mean, me personally, let's say, I think it's to add to the strategic ambiguity is a good thing towards the EU. Of course, you can discuss what were the, let's say, what were the forces driving Macron to do this? Maybe some domestic issues, some European politics, but still, it's in my view, it's awareness that we need to be more kind of more daring in our approach, and not always, not always reactive, maybe not always putting kind of a red lines for our own assistance to Ukraine. So I would see it in this angle, of adding to strategic ambiguity as of this geopolitical awakening of Europe. But maybe only to add also one thing to the previous discussion about what my colleague on the panel, Steve, mentioned about the EU enlargement. And I think this is also an important element of a strategic approach of the EU towards Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has revived the unfortunate war, or Russian war has revived the idea of enlargement and has given a new impetus. We cannot say when the enlargement will happen. I think some expectations in Ukraine maybe are too optimistic. I'm myself from Poland. I remember how difficult it was also in the case of Poland. In the case of Ukraine, it will not be easy either. But what also Steve mentioned is extending the cooperation, single market, cooperating with candidate countries, with Ukraine in as many areas as possible. Is also a very good and right approach. And of course, with Ukraine, it's not so difficult because we have the association agreement, we have the deep and comprehensive free trade area. So there's already a lot of cooperation. And of course, for example, like kind of I hope very much that very soon we'll have, for example, the agreement between Ukraine and the EU on roaming. This was a very kind of a tangible development in the EU member states. When you go from one state to another, you don't pay extra for roaming. So for the Ukrainian citizens to have it will also be kind of another link to the EU. So I think I will stop here. Thanks.
Yeah, just to reflect briefly on the last point, I think it's probably one of the most tangible thing that you noted, that you don't really pay extra for roaming, for talking, or for being connected, and it's something that you really feel like you are in one space, or in one entity. So so this unity is really felt here. So I totally agree here. Although it's probably a small thing in the whole scheme of things. Yeah, please, Christy.
Yes, well, thank you. There are several important dimensions to reflect on regarding the statement by the French President Macron. From the viewpoint of countries that are, say, the strongest supporters of Ukraine in our region, like in the eastern and northern member states, it was above all seen as a good, fresh push to the European debate. And it was an important signal that Europe does not exclude any possible measures. And then, of course, there was a lot of kind of misinterpretation, I think, in the reactions when people thought that, is this about France or Europe preparing to send troops to Ukraine, which was never the case. I mean, this is not what it was about. It was about this kind of strategic signaling that we still have tools and options that we are not using at this point, but we are also not excluding anything looking to the future. And of course, from the Russian point of view, this put Russia in a more difficult position. And the West has been so far very good at drawing all sorts of red lines and being so afraid of escalation and telling about what we are not going to do. But if the Russians are in a position where they can't be sure what the Western next step is going to be, they have to take it into account in their calculation. And what we know about the Russian strategic thinking really suggests that Russia actually avoids getting into direct military conflict with NATO, in spite of all the rhetoric of Russia already being at war against NATO. when we talk about real warfare between Russia and NATO, as long as NATO is credible and united and has the resources that it has and is ready to use them, Russia does not want to go into that fight because it knows it's so much weaker. The Macron statement really, I think, in the end had this positive impact of increasing the strategic ambiguity. But then several problems that it showed was kind of lack of coordination, because he clearly came out as a surprise. And then the first reactions in many European countries and also the US was that, no, we are not going to send troops. And this kind of watered down to some extent the initial value of the statement. And that was partly because indeed it came as a surprise, and then countries felt the need to say that, no, we are not sending troops. And this kind of, I think, led the debate actually in the wrong direction for a while. And also it kind of showed lack of leadership in Europe. It was especially Germany that was very annoyed about the French statement, and you could clearly see that there are differences between Paris and Berlin, and the relationship is not good. So it was kind of exposed in these discussions, but it was nothing new really, and this is a problem for Europe, that there is this difference, and Germany being extremely cautious, while then France, and that's one additional layer in this issue. I think France actually has been going through some deep rethinking about European security, about the place of Ukraine in European security, about the relationship to Russia, about European defense, about the threats, and in my interpretation, and having discussed with several French experts, this is actually something quite deep, and it's important. At least as long as the current regime in Russia is in power, I think France has really abandoned this dream about getting into some kind of diplomatic negotiations and reaching an agreement, and then engaging in efforts to build a common security architecture with Russia. This used to be the French agenda. And in the first months of the full-scale war, it was still very visible that this was the French agenda. But then I think Macron was very personally, deeply kind of disappointed and humiliated also by the Russian side. And then he realized that he has to change course. And so it's quite amazing that France has become a supporter of Ukraine's accession to the EU and even to NATO, and kind of seeing this whole geopolitical reality in Europe in a very new way, seeing, I think, the contribution that Ukraine can actually make to European security as one of us in Europe, being on the same side with us, and then also having a more realistic understanding of the Russian goals regarding European security order, which are simply incompatible with the understanding in the EU and in NATO. The way we see the rules-based order that we want to defend in Europe, it's just not shared by the Russian leadership. So any dream about reaching a common understanding through some kind of compromises over Ukraine, it's just not going to work. And it's very important that we have a common understanding about this in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kristi. Steven, please, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, very little. I think Kristi's expose is really spot on. And so maybe just to flag still, you know, what the principal drivers of Macron's statements were, I think indeed, you know, to reflect this geopolitical awakening on the French side in its strategic thinking about Europe, making up for lost time with Central and Eastern Europe as well. I mean, his speech at Globsec in May 23 was all about that, I think. And then, of course, the Vilnius statements in the margins of the NATO summit, amplified that. And indeed, as Yaroslav alluded to, domestical, political reasons as well, of course, to take some wind out of the sails of Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National, which is trying hard to distance herself from Russia and its meddling in the French political debates. But if one looks at the statements made by Macron, during the spring and summer of 23, there are quite a few, in fact, and one would then have to relate on each of them what the reactions and public perception have been. I think on boots on the ground, that statement which eclipsed all others in a way, Christy gave a very good explanation. But Macron also said, and the same goes for Ukraine's post-war accession to NATO, I think. Which I think is tactical and strategic reasons as well, to basically try and secure an American pledge to Article 5 mutual defense of Ukraine, and thus not put the onus on French, mutual defense obligations in a way only. It's really a leap forward from the bilateral security cooperation that France concluded with Ukraine, which is quite hollow, at least when I read it as a lawyer, in terms of commitment. So that is really quite significant, I think. But then there was also, the comments about the defeat of Russia, which becomes indispensable basically for the security and stability of Europe, and to stand with Ukraine for as long as it's necessary and whatever it takes. That's a much bolder statement indeed than some of his European colleagues have allowed themselves to express. And then finally, the commitment to supply long-range cruise missiles, the Scalps, to Ukraine is, I think, to repair a little bit, the promotional damage on the French side for under-equipping, at least transparently, Ukraine, whereas Germany has gone so much further than it, of course. Sorry for the background noise. And kind of tries and repair that lost image on the side of the French, but at the same time blaze a trail for others to follow with the Patriots and the Tauruses that I mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. And if to react quickly, in part it's also at least add to what you mentioned of this perceptions of Macron's statement. It's also I got this feeling that it's also a bit about returning the position of the active geopolitical agent to France in some level, especially in other, like an actor who take active part and probably even in some way a leading role in different geopolitical contexts, including war conflicts. That it's also figured at some level, to me at least here internally in Ukrainian discourse about these statements. It's been like that. We remember about this international legions of France, for example, or other interferences, and so a lot of people remarked on that. But I also think that it's really about all the things that you mentioned, and it's both on internet, on EU level, and also internal domestic matters. And in some way, looking from outside, from Ukraine to EU, we see a very different Europe, I think, from European Union from the 2 years ago now, in many ways, with the different interactions, I would say, and different stances. And I would say that probably that's idealistic notion, but in some levels, for me, it's a stronger Europe. And here it's going to the last question that I put. It's a bit how Ukraine may strengthen EU. Why, like we know, we understand a lot why Ukraine needs EU. Yeah, and we talk about that a lot for many years, especially. First talking about enlargement, now talking about common defense and EU's help in the war. But why you would need Ukraine? How would you probably argue that to your public or to your colleagues? Who wants to start?
Yeah,
please,
I can start again. Yeah. I mean, why we need Ukraine? I think now with this Russian war against Ukraine, it's become clear on which side Ukraine stands. So for me, now the issue of enlargement is an issue of geopolitics. So unless Russia changes dramatically in the coming years, probably it will not be the case. Then we will have to defend, to draw a line between those who wants to stick to an international rules-based order and those who don't. So I think this at the geostrategic level, and of course, but it's if you talk about Ukrainian army, but it's not so much about the EU, because defense is an exclusive competence of the EU member state. But what Ukraine has done, the experience of fighting this war, this new war, as they say, as people say, the mixture of the First World War and the Clone Wars, Star Wars. So it's unique. Also, the defense industry drawing lessons from the drone production, technological development. This experience is very unique. Also, the tactics that the Ukrainian army employs to counter the threats, risks, the innovative potential. So those are very valuable issues, things, potential for the EU member states. But of course, this is, let's say, in parallel to the EU enlargement process. And of course, the other thing, when we talk about EU enlargement, we have to bear in mind that 6 or 7 million Ukrainians, they are already on the EU territory. So they participate in the single market. I will stop here, thanks.
Just to add, mention the enlargement, the rule-based order in Ukraine. We often talk about this war being existential to Ukraine, and but this is my conception that if we look from this perspective of defending a rule-based order and a normative side, that you get the feeling that it's also existential for those who believe in the rule-based order, or those who believe in this, in values associated with the EU, with like freedom or equal rights and human rights in general. So, I mean, again, it could be a very normative side or idealistic level, but I guess it's, in many ways, it is important that this war is also about that, not just about geopolitics or like purely pragmatic utilitarian sides. Christy, probably, what would you add about?
Yes, this is a big question, and indeed, I would also start with security and geopolitics, and that is linked indeed to the future of the rules-based order. If Ukraine were to lose and it would not be able to join the EU and would be left behind, it would be hard to have any credibility for the EU as the defender of rules-based order or European values. It would be such a massive failure. But then speaking more concretely about security and defense, the potential contribution of Ukraine is really huge. And that's something, of course, that is often referred to. Ukraine has the most experienced, the most battle-hardened army that is going to be an asset for European defense, for the EU, for NATO. And then defense industry is an additional element which was also mentioned by Yaroslav. It's quite amazing how innovative and kind of agile Ukraine has been in developing its own defense industry. It really shows this kind of degree of resilience and kind of creativity that in this very hard situation, Ukraine has managed to keep up with this changing nature of warfare and started its own drone production, and also otherwise is in the process of developing its defense industry. There seems to be a lot of interest in many European countries in cooperation with the Ukrainian companies. Even in Estonia, we are a very small country, but it's like 10 Estonian defense industry enterprises are already cooperating with their Ukrainian counterparts, and the interest is huge. And in particular, it is drone production, which is a big challenge for Europe. We see that this is like one element where the nature of warfare is really changing, and this is going to be future long-lasting change. And today it is China that is controlling like vast majority of drone production on the global scale. You know, mostly we are talking about civilian use drones, but then in practice they are dual use, and Russia has been receiving huge amounts of drones from China, supposedly for civilian use, but then they are used actually on the battlefield against Ukraine. And this has given a certain advantage to the Russian side. And Europe has not been able to support Ukraine in this aspect because Europe has not been investing in its own drone production. And this is like one of the questions of technological development and the question of how Europe can be more autonomous, also technologically in future, reduce its dependencies in such critical areas. And so Ukraine can be, I think, in future, a major player on like European scale in developing European drone production and in cooperation with the European partners. So this is has very big potential, and it has significance really beyond the issue of Russia and kind of the Russian-European relations, but it's also then an important aspect in relationship to China. And then an additional point is then the economic contribution of Ukraine. There is a tendency in Europe to see Ukraine more as a burden in economic terms, because of course it will kind of mean additional costs for the EU to accept a new member state where the level of welfare is much below EU average. But then there is also the other side of how Ukraine can give a boost to European economy once the reconstruction gets really properly going. And furthermore, Ukraine is, of course, very rich in various resources. It's a big, very efficient agricultural producer. We know this is, again, it's more seen in European discussions as a problem or as a challenge rather than as an asset for the EU. But thinking about food security on the global scale, Ukraine really has to be seen as an asset, and most of its agricultural exports is actually global and going to countries outside Europe and not to the EU. So it's been painful to watch this issue between Ukraine and Poland over agricultural production, and Russia is very skillful in kind of manipulating and making use of these kind of disputes between European countries, and has really kind of magnified the problem. But in the end, I think we really need to be able to find a European solution to this and look at Ukraine more as a contributor to European and global food security in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I guess there's a need for a lot of compromises in future regarding the agricultural sector and food production sector of Ukraine. There are some jokes also that as in Ukraine here that at the war, as Yaroslav mentioned, is like First World War with a mixture of drones and clones war. It's the same for Ukrainian economics. It's where you have agrarian sector with the IT and drones, and probably not, especially after all these missile strikes, not that much production like other industries, I would say, especially heavy industries in between, especially after what's been going on for last 10 years, strongly affected industrial sector in Ukraine. But you mentioned drones, and especially as Stephen before mentioned, maritime security and the importance of Black Sea and movement there. And there's been a lot of discussions, I would say, about Ukraine using sea drones also, and to get some advances and to gain some in Black Sea. And while there is a lot of discussion on whether the sea drones might be used on larger scales, or what would be a potential usage of these, it does raise the question of technologies or different opportunities for countries without a strong fleets, traditional fleets in a maritime aspect, in maritime security aspects. But I would probably stop here, or let's just add this as a food for thought and pass it to Stephen, please.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I actually don't have much to add to what was already said, and perhaps that should not come as a surprise, because I worked together with Kristi and her in a project which she led for the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, trying to extrapolate, the benefits of including Ukraine. Certainly, also the cost of it, for sure, but to think harder about the important issues that need to be discussed in order to counter this dreadful and surreal notion of Ukraine fatigue among European politicians and decision makers. So on the area of defense shared values, the economy, I really don't have much to add, and perhaps I should waive my time as a panelist, to the benefit of discussion with the audience. So
Yeah, and we have a question, so I will ask it without. If we agree that Ukraine should or will join EU, do you still believe NATO should keep its pivotal role as a regional actor? I mean, looking internally to the European region, don't you think that Ukrainian crisis is calling you to make to take more seriously its CSDP capacities and objectives? And moreover, is the current EU treaty equipped to enhance EU role as a major actor on defense or military matters?
So maybe I can jump in on that,
this.
and then
Yeah.
and then allow the others to come in later. So I think what most member states and Ukraine and other candidate countries too have realized is that their best level of protection lies in the dual membership of NATO and the EU. This is, I think, in part driven by the US security, and its umbrella over Europe, pourvu que ça dure, as the French would say. As a result of the political fragility, of course, within the NATO decision making, and this is not only related to the US but also to the so-called multi-vector foreign policy by Turkey's Erdogan. I see that Sinan has joined the panel for the second round already. So it is imperative, as mentioned in answer to your first question, that the European Union's strategic autonomy in defense is shored up. And here, some of the innovations which have been made over the last 2 years, which are in line with what was projected in the documents that came out of the European Global Strategy in 2016, with PESCO developing all kinds of concrete capability development projects, with the European Defence Fund, tapping into the general budget of the EU, despite also with the EPF now, despite the treaty limitations on using the budget, the general budget of the EU for military expenditures, emanating from CSDP operations and having other defense implications. I think those rapid innovations have clearly shown the limits of the current treaty structure in the defense policy writ large, not just the CSDP, as I just alluded to, but also on the defense industrial side, where there's still a treaty provision in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, Article 346, paragraph 1b, if anyone's interested, which basically offers member states a national procurement exception, which of course is being used by all of them. And so despite the paper advancement towards joint production and procurement, I think the bitter reality is still that member states procure and produce largely domestically. And if they can't do that together, that they buy elsewhere, as the Czech proposal, to plug the gap in supplies to Ukraine clearly shows. So there is, I think, a need in the mid to longer term, when treaty reform becomes politically palatable to all member states, to really put this on the table in order to be able for the European Union to flesh out its military muscle more than the current legal constraints allow for it.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Risto, Yaroslav, do you want to add to this question? Please, Christy.
Yes. In the broad picture, I would say it's indeed very clear, as Stephen also said, that Ukraine and the other candidate countries, they aim for both EU and NATO membership, and both are necessary. And I think actually the full-scale war in Ukraine has made the division of labor between the EU and NATO clearer to some extent for the time being. NATO is really back to its historical key task of territorial defense and collective defense of its member states. And that has been its focus with regard to Ukraine, sometimes to the frustration of Ukrainians. NATO has been really very cautious about any involvement with Ukraine. That's kind of slowly changing, and the role of NATO in coordinating military assistance to Ukraine has been lately discussed, and it seems to be moving forward. So NATO is gradually, I think, taking a stronger role also in engaging with Ukraine, while still being very clear that it is not a party to the war. This goal of NATO membership is what provides the long-term security guarantee for Ukraine. It's the most effective, the most credible solution. There is no other good alternative, simply. But having said that, the EU has become so much more relevant in the field of European defense, and it can do a lot, especially when it comes to strengthening European capabilities, defense industry, procurement, joint procurement in particular. Well, it is a difficult matter. Stephen was explaining the details. But that is also something that is like a very dynamic field, and it's not about the EU taking over the task of collective defense. That is NATO's responsibility, but it is a different role. It's the role of strengthening European defense capability, which then also makes NATO a stronger actor. And I don't really see any change in this regard in foreseeable future. It would be a massive change for the EU to if we get at some point to discussions about treaty change, to actually revise this issue. But I don't see any readiness for that, to be honest, for among the member states.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Yeah, please, Yaroslav.
Yeah, if I may, it's a fascinating topic, and I also think that a deeper change in this regard of the EU treaties for the foreseeable future not possible. Although maybe the enlargement process, geopolitical situation maybe will prompt member states to some other reforms in the treaty. Also, for example, we discussed agriculture, common agricultural policy, regional policy. I wouldn't exclude changes there that in my view are unnecessary. But on the development of CSDP, I also agree that there is no other choice. We have to shore up the CSDP in a pragmatic way, like joint procurement, for example, is a question also of political will, but also of availability of, let's say, of modern defense equipment to be procured jointly. And of course, there's Article 41 of the Treaty on the European Union prohibiting financing expenditure having military or defense implications. I remember in the past in the Council long discussions of what it means in practice, what we can finance. And somebody mentioned also here today the European Peace Facility, which played a huge role in reimbursing member states for delivery of weapons to Ukraine. This would have not been imaginable like 10, 15, 20 years ago. But this European Peace Facility was actually created before the full-scale invasion. It was created with the view of helping CSDP operations, for example, in Africa. That they do the training. They should also be available to finance some equipment for the armed forces of the host country that they train. So we are making some steps, but of course, I mean, I understand that from the point of view of Ukraine, of many other countries, as to the defense issues, the membership in NATO is a top priority, I would say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, and thank you very much for joining for discussion, because we are really running out of time. In several minutes, we will have a second panel starting, and yeah, I guess to refer to the last question, in a way, I guess there has been a lot of feeling, at least in part in Ukraine, that probably NATO is not really doing that much as was expected from NATO to do. But in the end, I do think that more or less everyone realized how you put it in your answer, that there probably no other way, and both NATO and EU are a necessary elements of security, which both are needed from, and each have a separate role or different role, but in like this fashion world synergy, that it might work more effectively together. Anyway, I thank you. I guess we will stop in here, and I thank you very much for joining us today, particularly for this discussion. So if you're interested, you're welcome to stay and listen to the second panel. But anyway, thank you very much, Yaroslav, for joining us. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Stephen. And I will be passing the floor to my colleague who will be doing the second panel. Thank you.